like to take the opportunity to introduce our three panelists. So first, Seth Shostak is currently a senior astronomer at the SETI Institute, a not-for-profit research organization whose mission is to explore, understand, and explain the origin and nature of life in the universe, and to apply the knowledge gained to inspire and guide present and future generations. Seth claims to have developed his interest in extraterrestrial life at the age of 10 when he first picked up a book about the solar system. Since then, he's earned degrees in physics and astrophysics from Princeton and Caltech. In addition to his current research at the SETI Institute, Seth hosts a weekly radio show and has a lengthy film and television resume. He's also written more than 400 articles on science and has co-authored a college textbook on astrobiology. My favorite tidbit about Seth, which will probably make sense once he starts talking, is according to his own estimate, he thinks he was born just about 2 generations too early to benefit from the cure for death.
Nice.
Next, going down the line, we have Loretta Hidalgo Whitesides. She plans to be one of the first humans to fly in space as a tourist, which is very fitting for this panel. She and her husband were among the first people to buy a ticket for a suborbital spaceflight on Spaceship Two, which is Virgin Galactic's tourist spaceplane. Though she may be a future space tourist, she is no stranger to adventure in extreme environments. She holds degrees in astrobiology from Stanford and Caltech and has studied plant life in the Canadian Arctic and traveled with director James Cameron to hydrothermal vents 2 miles under the ocean. She's experienced over 5 hours of combined weightlessness as a flight director for Zero G Corp.
Cool.
She's also the co-creator of Yuri's Night, an annual international celebration commemorating milestones in space exploration. It's celebrated each year on or around April 12th, which is tomorrow. So if you see a space party near you, keep your eyes open for that, and you have Loretta to thank. Finally, on the end there, Fred Haberman. Fred Haberman is many things, including a CEO, founder of a creative agency, and a pond hockey enthusiast. Through the Haberman Agency, which he co-founded with his wife, Fred and his team help organizations generate revenue while driving positive social change. He has helped many brand movements become successful, including Volvo Cars of North America, Annie's Homegrown, and Organic Valley. He believes that social venture capital is a viable solution for solving the world's problems while still producing profits for businesses. Fred also co-founded Urban Organics, a Minnesota-based aquaponics farm. The goal of Urban Organics is to help inspire a new food system for the people by the people. One of 2 organically certified aquaponics farms in the U.S., Urban Organics uses 2% of the water of conventional agriculture and is situated in a food desert where people have little access to fresh produce. In addition to all of that, Fred is passionate about pond hockey and founded the U.S. Pond Hockey Championships in 2005. So these are our 3 panelists. Let's give them a quick round of applause.
Woo!
And now we'll have some time for opening statements from all of our panelists. We'll go ahead and start with Seth. Go ahead.
I always recommend that audiences not applaud before the panelists have said anything. That'll become, the reason is obvious, isn't it? Okay, this room isn't so flat. There's a dais up here. Do you want me to stand up, or can you see in the back? You see, okay. All right, the answer was stand up, but okay. All right, well, look, let me just say something about, there's a real expert here on space tourism, but it's for fun and profit, and I think that premise should really come out of the Department of Redundancy department, because if it's not fun, there's no profit, right? And we've already discussed the fun part in other panels. I might remind you of some of the attractions of space tourism. As I've mentioned, I think yesterday, at a conference that I attended in Iowa, there was a gentleman there who was in the motel business, and he had studied the attractiveness of putting up, 8 sort of Motel 6 rooms in orbit, and charging people $200,000 to spend the weekend there and enjoy the views and all that. And it turned out that what was driving the market was the thought of weightless sex. So, and he was very matter of fact about this, and he figured, okay, if you get 8 up there, some wealthy people go up there with a lot of Velcro and they enjoy weightless sex, then, he can afford to put a second one up there. Now it's 16 units, the price comes down a bit, the market grows, and so forth and so on. So that's okay. By the way, if any of you feel that you can't wait for this, so to speak, then you could, of course, just put on some scuba equipment and, have weightless sex that way. I guess Loretta might be able to speak to that, actually, because she's done that. I hope so, anyhow. Tanks for the memories. Okay, all right, now, Okay. But the other attraction, and I find this really an attraction, is the views, right? You want to make sure you look out the right window. I have a little device in my office, actually, that shows me the view from the International Space Station. They have a camera on there that, you can do this too. It's not very hard. And it's endlessly fascinating. To begin with, you see that the Earth really is a water world, because 9 times out of 10 you look at the screen and it's North Pacific Ocean, South Pacific Ocean, North Atlantic Ocean. It's all ocean mostly. But occasionally you fly over areas where it's not cloudy and you can see things. Like if you're in Baja California, you see all the way up to San Francisco. It's very interesting. The other day I saw Florida in the distance and the whole East Coast and that kind of thing. These views are, you can see them from the ground. You don't have to go up there. But going up there, I just think that would be spectacular. So, okay, that is an incentive for tourism. I don't worry about the incentives. I think people are interested. Let me point out just one mechanical thing. Of course, you can already buy a ride, to go up and come back down, right? And if you go up 61 miles, 100 kilometers, you're considered to have entered space. And you can tell because there are signs along the way, last gas before space. I don't know who decided 100 kilometers was space. I mean, there isn't much atmosphere out there, so maybe it's space. But in any case, and so to go up and come down, all right, the amount of energy to go up and go into orbit, right, that's about a factor of 2 more. And if you want to go to the moon or Mars or any of those other places, including the stars, then it's another factor too. That's just to keep some idea of the requirements, which will affect the cost. And there's also the life support thing. If you're going to go on a trip around the moon or around Mars, obviously you need life support, otherwise you won't enjoy it nearly as much. All right, but I'm not here to discuss the mechanics or the technology, but why we would even consider this, tourism, when there's science to be done out there. Well, I think it's because there's an indisputable historical progression here. When it comes to new, frontiers, whether they're final or not so final, it begins with exploration, and the next stage is tourism, and then the third stage is colonization. Now, I know that colonization has kind of a bad ring to it here in Boulder, right? But maybe they're trying to colonize Loveland. Are you trying to do that? Bob Zubrin, who is controversial in his own right, Bob Zubrin points out that if it weren't for the discovery of the New World, right, Europe would never have become the kind of democratic place that it is today. Because in medieval times, it was very feudal, and you were stuck on the land as a serf. But once the New World had been discovered, you could work your way down to a port, in principle, work your way down to a port, get on a ship, and leave it behind. You could escape that. There was an escape valve. And that forced the change in the feudal system in Europe. So he says, we need another escape valve. And so, I know it's probably the kind of credo you'd expect here in Boulder to say, let's fix Earth. Forget all this space stuff. Let's just fix Earth. But that would, I think, be equivalent to 500 years ago saying, let's fix feudal Europe. You might be able to do it, but there are easier ways. Okay, so let me just say the age of exploration, we all know about that, the great age of exploration beginning in about 1500, 1492, that kind of thing, where, of course, we explored all these new places, and those are the names you remember. The first person to get to, the Americas, if you will, if you neglect the Scandinavians, and, all these other places, those are names you remember. But right after that, there was, in fact, tourism. Steam in particular, the advent of steam, both in ships and eventually railroads, allowed the wealthy of Europe to go to these exotic places like India or Africa or Egypt and so forth, and write about it when they came back, and show people their drawings and so forth, and make these places familiar. These were cultures that were totally unknown in Europe, but they made them familiar. The tourists were doing something very useful. Okay, and in fact, you could even say the invention of photography. Those that care about that, I care about that, was due to tourism, because people would take these little camera obscura devices, with lenses and mirrors, and try and sketch the pyramids on a piece of paper, in front of them. And that led to an incentive to, can you somehow record that projected image? And, people in Europe figured that out. So anyhow, the David's lithographs of Egypt, I'm sure some of you have seen these, they make you want to go there and learn more about it. So tourism makes the exotic seductive. It serves a very important function. I'll end up by saying that, we can talk about colonizing the moon or Mars, and we've discussed many times, what's in it for you to do that? And there is a lot in it for you to do that, believe it or not, even just colonizing space, in orbiting space colonies. But if past is prologue, tourism will precede colonization. Tourism is the next step. Okay.
Awesome.
And that's why Seth is at CWA all the time. Yeah, make feudal Europe great again. I think that's a great idea. I mean, you know, one of the things that I like to say about space, the most precious resource. So I've worked in the space industry my whole life. You know, my first trips to Boulder were for the Case for Mars conferences in the '90s with Bob Zubrin. Anyway, you know, my friends are people who want to mine asteroids and things like that. But I always say that the most precious resource that we have in outer space is that blank slate. That opportunity for us to start to create, to be the founding fathers, to birth a new civilization, to start from scratch and build up. You know, how do we do things sustainably? How do we do things inclusively? And it's an incredible opportunity to create new systems and new orders and new governments and new civilizations. And I get all Star Trekky and Star Warsy about it. And I'm a Jedi. I'm a card-carrying Jedi. So you know, any card-carrying Jedis in the room. So I think it is. I think that, you know, rather than sort of just trying to tinker with feudalism, like if you just start clean sheet and make something new, and then everyone looks over at America and is like, man, we ought to do that. That looks cool. Let's try some of that. You know, and you got women wearing pants, and you get women voting, and all these crazy things start happening, and it's great for the world. But what I wanted to start with today was I wanted to find out who I'm talking to. So how many of you would consider yourself space people? You study space, you work in space, you read all about space, you love space. Oh, those are my people. So. And how many of you would be interested or willing to go on a trip to space if I was, panning out tickets for tomorrow? Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, again, I got Fred too. That's good. Fred's excited to go with us.
Let's go, Trappist.
He's all in for Trappist. That's like 40 light years away, but I'm not that. I'm pretty adventurous, but I'm not that adventurous. So so how many of you guys have seen the movie Avatar or Titanic, the Cameron movies? Yeah. So it was a lot of fun to get to dive to the bottom of the ocean with Cameron. It was a great analog for space. We'd use the robotic arm on the submersible and they'd touch the hydrothermal vent worms, and they told me I was going to go down and see worms. They didn't tell me that they were 6 feet tall. Who wants to see a 6 foot tall worm? No, I don't. But you touch it, and they do that thing where it pulls itself to protect itself into the sheath it has at the bottom that's harder. And then you're watching Avatar, you're like, you totally stole that off Mother Nature. We saw that at the bottom of the ocean. So there's one of the fun things about Avatar is like the whole Navi forest on Pandora. Look at me pulling up my pop culture references. Is all very much like the undersea world that we were visiting. A lot of the bioluminescence, all that's real. All the stuff we were saying. Anyway, that's an aside. I just get carried away with all the fun adventures I've been on. So awesome. So you guys are an adventurous bunch. You're ready for space tourism. I have been ready for space tourism my whole life. Since I've been passionate about space since I was about 6 years old. The adults would always come over to me and they would say, so do you want to be an astronaut? Oh, I should talk right in the microphone. And I was like, no, because in my world, when I grew up, everyone was going to have a rocket in their garage, and so why did you need to be an astronaut to go to space? You just get to go to space whenever you want. Clearly, I was a little ahead of my time, but just like you're 2 generations ahead of being able to beat death. But it's okay, because what I'm excited about is I get to be a part of the people who are going to make that. I have a necklace that says "Make that so." I'm a part of the generation that gets to make that future possible for humanity, and I love it. There's no place I'd rather be. I was born at the perfect time. Some of my colleagues are always like, "Oh, we were born too late. We missed Apollo. We didn't get to see a Saturn V launch." And I was like, "Oh, but just wait. We're gonna get to see some really cool stuff launch." So I'm excited to build it. I grew up in the '80s, and we were promised flying cars at the Millennium. And we didn't get the flying cars, and we went through that deep depression when we didn't get the flying cars. But the lesson for me was, if you want something, you have to make it happen. The progress that Americans are so privileged to believe in and know is coming, has to be, envisioned, fought for, and built. And so that's what we're up to. And it has to be built with dollars. So that whole profit thing, I've realized, I'm not a very good capitalist, but I know that the things that we want to do cost a lot of money, and so you have to find people who are willing to invest the dollars and create this future. And one of the things I love about the space tourists is that they really see themselves as early adopters and making this possible. So my husband, George, and I, we bought our tickets to do a suborbital space flight like Alan Shepard did. We bought our tickets in 2005, and they were $200,000, and they're $250,000 now. And we are part of a group. We bought our tickets from Virgin Galactic, so we get to hang out with Richard Branson, who's just as cool as you might think. Actually, he's cooler than you think. He's just lovely. So I've got to hang out with a couple billionaires now, or million, famous people. And one of the things I love about Branson is he's just as lovable as you hope he is, and he's self-effacing, and he's humble, and he's always producing his results with love, which is what I really admire about him. There's a lot of directors and CEOs and people who can produce incredible results in the world, but they do it with a lot of force. And one of the things I love about Branson is he does it with grace and style. But okay, other side. Okay, so we bought our tickets from Virgin Galactic in 2005 to do a Starboat flight, and there's about 650 customers of Virgin Galactic around the world, and it's a really fun group to get to be a part of. And I really enjoy them, and most of them, I've gotten to meet most of them, and they for the most part, they're really motivated by this high-minded ideal of doing something, giving back, and opening up, being an early adopters to the technology to help it bring the cost of space flight down, kind of like, I like to say it's like a VCR, now you can get a VCR for $25 on Amazon, and so we're trying to do something to open up this industry. And, my dream, along with going to Saturn, is to do point-to-point space tourism, space travel. So you'd be able to, launch from, here and go anywhere in the world in under an hour. And it sounds crazy. It even sounds crazy to me, I'll be honest. But, imagine when the Wright brothers were taking off, if they told them in 50 years, 2066 years, that someone would be walking on the moon, like, their minds would have exploded. Like, they were bicycle repairmen. They didn't know, they couldn't deal with that at all. So, that's the future we're working for. And I really think it's, we were joking in the car on the way here about, Earth first, we'll screw up the other planets later. And so, being a card-carrying lefty, I'm also, deal with that a lot. People are like, well, we're concerned about our planet. And we want to fix Earth first before we go elsewhere. And for me, what really motivates me, when I was 12 years old, I was worried about ozone. I was worried about saving the whales. I was worried about acid rain. Those were the problems of the 80s. And I was like, as 12, I was like, how do I help my planet? What can I do? And I really believe that if we go to space, it can help us not only get the perspective of that overview effect, where people looking back say they see that thin atmosphere of Earth, and they say, and they fall in love with our home world, and they come back ready to fight to protect it. And we've had 550 people who've gone into space so far from around the world in the last 50 years. And with the advent of space tourism, with with Blue Origin coming online, with SpaceX coming online, with Virgin Galactic coming online, with Worldview coming online, we're set to double that number in the next few years. And it's an incredibly exciting moment for our species, because you're now going to have space ambassadors who are going back. We have customers in 58 countries around the world, going back to their home communities and being able to share firsthand this profound and powerful experience of floating weightless, of seeing the stars, out in the galaxies, and looking back at our home planet and seeing that fragile atmosphere and saying, you guys, we have to come together, we have to work together, we're all in this together, we're all crewmates on Spaceship Earth. Oh, thank you.
That was awesome. As you can tell from the bio, I am absolutely the least qualified to be on this panel, but I'll give it a shot. I've always been in love with exploration. And I will admit that I also have watched every single Star Trek Next Generation. And when I was a kid, at 11 years old, Star Wars came out. I'm 51, and it was probably the greatest thing that ever happened to me. So I've always dreamt of going into space. And a number of exciting things have happened to me. Just maybe they're random. I don't know. But when I was 25 years old, and I own a marketing agency, and the tag and the adventure travel company that we started, where we would take people to remote places on Earth, and I say that I'm the head of a marketing agency because the tagline was terrible. Taking people to remote wilderness places for passionate Earth explorers. Very, very long. And the whole idea was to take people to places man had never been to. And in 1993, we went to Kazakhstan and started a business. We were one of the wall had just come down, and we'd go to the Tian Shan mountain range, and we'd go to places where they had never seen people like us. Or going to Annapurna, in the middle of Annapurna, not on the Annapurna Trail, and going up to 18,000 feet. And I shared this story, and I can't believe I'm sharing this story with all these people because I'm not crazy. At least, don't ask my wife that question. But we were at 18,000 feet, and sure enough, we're looking at around 8 o'clock in the evening, and there is a planet. And about 20 minutes later, that planet started to move. I swear to God, it started to move, and it kind of went up in the air, and then it went down below the valley. I don't know what that was. It was an unidentified flying object. I don't know what it was. So anyway, we come back to the Twin Cities, where I'm from, and we started this agency to tell the stories of pioneers who are making a difference in the world. And we ended up working with this wonderful woman who was the first to cross Antarctica, Anne Bancroft, and Volvo Cars became a sponsor, and we ended up getting to know the folks at Volvo. We became their agency. And lo and behold, this guy, Richard Branson, decides that he wants to go to space. And he has this company called Virgin Galactic. And we get to know Richard Branson, we get to know Virgin Galactic, and we say, hey, we're launching this vehicle and we want to compare it to going to space. And so we created this sweepstakes where we would, the winner would be sent to space or get a ticket to space. So I got to hang out in London with Richard Branson, who was amazing. I don't know, it must be everyone he meets. He's very sincere. And he got a spaceship, or he got a spacesuit on, and I interviewed him in the spaceship. We talked about space for half an hour, and then we had him on the Today Show in the New York City, and he was taking advice from me, and I don't know anything. I mean, that's how humble the guy is. But anyway, he started to really he would talk to me, very unpretentious guy, and he started just talking about how real it really can be and how important it is. And it made me think about all the amazing technologies that, of course, are spawned by the idea of going into space. And I'm sure we could all talk about the various technologies. And it started to get me to think about my own entrepreneurship and how we can begin to use technologies on this planet that if we thought, okay, if I'm going to colonize another planet, what might we want to create here on this planet? And that, in some respects, spurred the idea of urban organics, which is the Guardian called one of the 10 most innovative farms in the world because we use 2% of the water in a closed-loop system to basically have fish in a synergistic relationship grow USDA organic plants, once again using 2% of the water in a food desert. And since then, by the way, $200 million of investment has gone into this food desert. But as you saw in that last movie, what was that last movie with Damon?
Oh,
Martian. They were using some of those concepts. And so I was like, oh my God, we've been doing this for 6 years and it's in The Martian. But anyway, last and not least, I had an opportunity to work on the Centennial Flight with the Wright brothers. And I truly believe that if we take a longer view on this thing and we invest and we spend time, and I'm going to buy a ticket, by the way, to space, that we will see some remarkable things. And I can't wait to see this planet from space. And I absolutely know. Last thing. When I was leading canoe trips to remote wilderness places and backpacking, I always said that the world would be a better place if we could have everybody do a solo for 24 hours in a remote wilderness location. And I truly believe that if we had folks not necessarily do a solo, but go into space and look back on Earth, this will be a better place, and we'll be happier people.
Amen.
Thank you all for your opening statements. We now have some time for you all to discuss amongst yourself if there's any questions you had about each other's opening statements or things like that. So I'll open it up to you now.
I got to respond to Fred's last comment there because if I agree with him, this is just an infomercial. And so I'm going to try and make it a little edgier by saying baloney, because the idea that you go up to space and you look down and the astronauts come back and they're changed. That's true, they are changed. And and now they've memorized Kumbaya and they're singing it all the time. Their spouses divorce them, they lose their jobs, their kids run away. So that everybody's going to get along if they can just see Earth from space. I get that all the time when people say, if you guys find extraterrestrial life, that'll be the end of conflict here, right? The Protestants will love the Catholics and the Shia will like the Sunnis and all that, right? Do you really believe that? I don't think so. But, what you ought to do is read the accounts of the people 106 years ago now, in Scott's expedition, or Shackleton's expeditions, who walked to the South Pole. They were all young people. They were like 21 years old, whatever. And they were doing something that was so incredible that when they came back, there was nothing else that was ever going to happen in their lives that measured up to that, right? The ones that did come back. And, some of them could live with that, and they'd write books or so forth. Many of them just led a dissipative life. They didn't know what to do anymore. And Dave Grinspoon and I were talking yesterday about somebody ought to write a book about what's happened to the astronauts. I don't know, maybe call it The Right Stuff Goes Wrong or something. Because some of them have come back and made a career out of it and done very well. Those are the ones you hear about. But others have become morose or whatever. They torture cats or whatever. So I think I think it's great to go up to space. I'd love to do it, but I don't think it's going to solve the world's problems.
Yeah, I don't think it will either, but I sure think that alternative perspectives, whether it was, being an exchange student at 17 and going to a far-off country and coming back with a new perspective, or at least beginning to become aware of new things, having your intellectual curiosity meet experiential learning, these are very powerful things, and we need more of it. When I was an exchange student, it was created by ambulance drivers, to hopefully, at least at the beginning, exchange kids from around the world so that indeed they could know more about each other. And I think there's also a piece to space around, there's an existential component to it. There's a spiritual component to it. And I think when we connect at that deeper level, I have to believe that it will unlock some positivity, or at least new perspectives. And but no, I don't think it's a panacea. Maybe it'll awaken someone to be more of an advocate for something they believe in.
Yeah, that's my goal. I used to be that Pollyanna. I'm not that Pollyanna anymore.
Yeah, well.
I've worked with a lot of astronauts, and I've met, they didn't get fixed. So I know it's not a silver bullet, but I don't believe it is. We have 650 customers. If 400 of them are true believers and really get it and are lit up by it and come back ready to take on their mission, whether it's organic food, food for food deserts, or it's, biodiversity hotspots, or it's, LGBT inclusion, whatever, if they come back, to powerful advocates for their mission and what they're here on Earth to do, like, I got my job done. I don't need to, we were down in a retreat once, and one of my friends, he'd been working in Afghanistan and things, and he said, our motto when we're out in the field is help the willing. And so that, if people come to fly into space with us and they're there to have a profound life-changing experience, I'm going to help them have it. If they're there to, just have a joyride and, get to be able to check a box off, great, that's fine. It's not for everyone, but for those who want to come back and change the world, we're ready.
Changing gears a little bit, this is a question that I had. So Seth, you talked about science, then tourism, then colonization. And this is a question for all three of you. What do you think are the dangers of potentially rushing into the colonization step, as we've seen with some of these private space companies?
Well, the obvious danger is people are going to die, right? They will. Unfortunately, if you go colonize Mars, not everybody's going to survive, unless you're Matt Damon, in which case you're guaranteed to survive. So, right, so, there's that. But to say rushing into it, hey, you pilgrims, you better stay in Holland. They were coming from Holland, right?
It could be dangerous.
Yeah, it could be dangerous. You probably oughtn't to do this. You're not going to stop them, right? People go on colonization expeditions. Why? Because they're unhappy where they are. And to tell them, you stay here and be unhappy, I don't think it's going to work. If they have the opportunity to go somewhere, they will. They don't buy it.
Dangers of Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Dangers of colonization too early. Well, you could also think of the dangers of colonization too late. One of the things we were also talking about recently was that Elon Musk brought up that, we have the technology to go into space right now, but we may not have it forever. You could think of this as a window of opportunity where humans have the ability to go into space. But just like the Egyptians, civilization collapsed and humanity lost the technology to build pyramids, and the Roman civilization collapsed and humanity lost the technology to build aqueducts and do agriculture, and we went through these dark ages. If our civilization collapses, humanity will lose that science and that art. And so, we sort of have to make sure we, don't wait too long, don't wait till you have everything perfect. You kind of have to go out a little bit. Got to make sure we're pushing the boundaries so you don't miss this window of opportunity to become a multi-planet species.
I'm pro-colonization.
You
I
call
never
it settlement.
thought about that.
Colonization
That's cool. I'm
still
pro-colonization. I think I'm going to put that out as a bumper sticker. Space colonization, that is. I spent a lot of time thinking about 2050. That's when we'll have 10 billion people on this planet, roughly. I think a lot about food waste. I think about climate change. We all do. But with that said, and that's where I get cynical and depressed, and colonization has a negative component to it. But when I think about colonization rather, in terms of what will it take to get to live on another planet or in space, it excites me because it spurs my innovative thinking. Mm-hmm. And innovation is what in many respects, there are some terrible consequences to some forms of innovation. We talked about the Green Revolution, and it fed people, but it had some terrible consequences that we could talk about, but that's not for this panel. But with that said, some very wonderful, beautiful, powerful innovations can be created, both from a medical perspective, a lifestyle perspective, the list goes on. And I think we need to be thinking that way. Yes, there will be some lost life, and I have to put my money where my mouth is and probably take that risk myself. I think in 4 or 5 years, my wife will let me do that.
Yeah, the other thing, Fred's in the hydroponics, I think, a little bit, right?
Aquaponics.
Oh, aquaponics. What's the difference?
The difference is really where we take aquaculture. Well, we have fish.
There's fish in it.
Fish.
Is the distinction fish?
There's fish.
Okay, there's fish in it. It's
fish.
hydroponics with fish.
Exactly. Thank you.
That's good because you get the salad and the entree. Okay, both. It's all right.
You get protein and nutrition on site. Okay. Think about that.
If you're willing to colonize just nearby space, right, which we'll do too, and in fact that may be the big opportunity, right? You can, the best place to farm is not on the ground here, but if you're up there, you get 24-hour-a-day sunlight, right? Sort of like Alaska, but without the bears. So you could have, be growing food and then just drop it back down to Earth. You have to bring it down, but you could do that. But the other thing is, of course, and we've talked about this many times at the CWA, that you have power sats. You have satellites with a lot of solar cells, and you solve the energy problem and all the pollution problems that you get from burning things to produce energy by doing that. So those are very direct benefits to the people that are down here. So obviously this is a cost-benefit analysis. Always is a cost-benefit analysis, and it was a cost-benefit analysis in 1620 too. Actually,
I'm really excited. There's the idea of a space solar satellite. That you're collecting the sun 24 hours and you're beaming it down to Earth. And it's not cost effective right now and blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that I think would be super cool is if you could beam the power to like a 747 so that you're not burning fossil fuels to go across the Atlantic. You're just using the solar power that the satellite's beaming down to you to cross the Atlantic. And then you can sort of clean up aviation a bit. I just think that there's some really cool stuff we can start doing when the costs of launch start to come down and space opens up.
The cost-benefit analysis is obviously it's a very interesting equation. What what automotive company has a larger market cap right now than Ford Motor Company and lost $700 million last year?
Snapchat.
Tesla?
Tesla. So we have to take some. And do we believe that Tesla has a chance or a shot, even if it fails? Do you think some good things are going to come from Tesla? I do. So that's part of the overall idea of innovation, right? It's part of let's take some bold steps here. We have one life. Let's live a big story. Let's go for it.
This is a question for Fred. Can you comment a little bit more on specifically your work with aquaponics, and have you thought at all about it being used in space? I think this is probably something that we're curious about.
Well, it's already been proven in The Martian.
There were no fish in his, and
No,
he
there's
didn't
no
have a
fish, but
hydroponic
that's
system
okay.
or a
That's okay.
fish.
We got plenty of
he just
sun.
had
That's
dirt
all
and
right.
poo.
It was pretty weird. I didn't want to use my own poop for that, but whatever. It works. Well, we touched on it. I mean, there's no doubt that aquaponics. So I'm very interested in food security, and of course, if you're going to space, you need food security. You need very efficient systems. You need and it's amazing how much food you can produce quickly with aquaponics. As a matter of fact, the yields are 40% faster than traditional agriculture. So the resources that and the inputs are far less. Right now with aquaponics in this old Hams building that we have where the facility is housed, we don't have access to sunlight. So the next generation, and ideally it'll be here in this Boulder area or in Southern California, it'll all be solar, or a majority of it will be solar, and that's what's really, really exciting. Because right now the biggest cost input is electricity and the use of LED lights. But the next generation will be solar, and I'm really, really pumped about it. So you can only imagine what the potential might be when you think about it in terms of space. There will be some type of aquaponics or actually, you know what the greatest innovation is right now with that? It's right here in Colorado. It's in the cannabis industry. So taking some of the lessons and learnings from what's happening in the cannabis industry and applying it to space, weird connection there, could be pretty interesting.
Unexpected benefits.
Yeah, new meaning to being high.
That's exactly, well, space cakes, right?
Before we open it up for Q&A from the audience, do you guys have anything else you want to discuss amongst yourselves?
I'd like to ask Seth if he believes in extraterrestrials.
Listen, that's part of my job description. I have to believe that they're out there. I don't believe they're here. I heard your story. We could discuss that, but that's a different panel. And I know there are plenty of people in Boulder who think that they are here. That was one of the first panels I was on at the Conference on World Affairs. But I do think that they're out there, because if they're not, you're a miracle, right? And you'd like to think you're a miracle because your parents told you that from the time you were born. But, you know, from a scientific perspective, every time you thought there was something very, very special about your situation, our situation, we were wrong. So there's a good bit of historical precedent for thinking that we're just another duck in the row.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll start giving some questions here from the audience. Just a reminder, you can submit these questions on the app, or you can fill out those note cards that our producers are going around, and they'll bring them up to me. The first question from the audience: could space exploration lead to more pollution? Is it sustainable to try to colonize when you would have to ship resources out to a planet while you try to find ways to cultivate resources on this planet? And this is a question, I think, for all three of you.
That's a really important question to me. You know, I don't want what we're doing to be a net negative for the planet, because my intention is to help Earth. So the reality is that, yes, rockets, you know, produce exhaust, and so, you know, we have to be responsible for that and accountable for that. Luckily, our industry is so small that it's very minuscule amount. So, you know, when you have 50,000 airliners in the air every minute and you have one rocket launch every 6 months, you know, it's we're still such a nascent industry that our drop in the bucket is a lot smaller, so that's good. But my intention is to keep pushing our industry to be looking at, can we power the rocket from the solar power satellite from above instead of from chemical rockets from the ground, we're not there yet, and the technology is slow, but we can get there. You can launch with liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen and make water, which is, how cool is that? Not only can you power your car with a hydrogen fuel cell, but you can power your rocket with it as well. So we have the potential to make spaceflight green, and it's just a matter of fulfilling on that and investing in that and heading that direction. And then in terms of going to other planets, my goal is that they're self-sufficient, that we don't have to ship things out to them, that they're growing their own food and they're closed loop. They're recycling all their air and all their water, and they're growing their own food. So we don't have to be shipping them things all the time. They have their 3D printer for the parts that break. There's some things that they'll still need, like M&Ms. But we'll figure that out. And then ultimately, I want to get to the point where they're so self-sufficient that Detroit is like, man, that city on Mars is totally closed loop. We got to up our game and make Detroit closed loop. Like, let's do it better here.
Yeah. The idea that we would be sending a lot of resources into space to support these people, I agree with Loretta. That isn't the way you do it. It's too expensive. You can't afford to. The most valuable thing perhaps is water. This stuff, water, right? Can you drink this? Water. It's 64 pounds per cubic foot if you measured it this morning, right? And it takes $10,000 to lift a pound of stuff in a rocket. So $10,000 for 1 cubic foot of water. That's even more than the bottled stuff at the supermarket, right? That's a lot of money, and that's just water, right? Anything else? So you try as much as you can to use use stuff that's there, right? The Pilgrims, when they landed in Massachusetts, they didn't expect food shipments from England, right? Eventually, they got manufactured goods, and that turned out to be a good thing. So I don't think that that's really the issue. It's not that costs a lot of money, because that's not what you're doing. You're using things in situ. And in fact, you become a net exporter eventually. There was something in, you saw Avatar, right? We talked about Avatar. And they were going to this moon, Pandora, to mine unobtainium, which you can find on the periodic chart in any 11th grade classroom. All right, unobtainium. And they told you, Cameron made a mistake, because he told the audience how much it was worth per kilogram or something, right? It was an enormous amount of money, millions of dollars per kilogram. But he also told you how long it took the rockets to get from Earth to Pandora. And that allows you to figure out the speed of the rockets and the energy cost. And if you assume the energy cost is the same per kilowatt hour as you pay here in Boulder, right, then it works out that sending a pound of unobtainium back to Earth was like ordering a book from Amazon and paying $60,000 for the shipping. So this idea that you're going to be sending raw materials around, I think, is goofy.
So Seth, help me. I want to help us with a potential solution. If we go to space and we want to spend more than 5 to 10 minutes, let's say we want to spend, I don't know, a year. How do we deal? And we're humans. We're not just. We're going up. How do we deal with the water challenge?
You
I don't
just
have an
recycle
answer.
stuff. They've already dealt with that.
What's the answer? I don't know what it is.
Yeah, on ISS, all the water is recycled.
It's all recycled. I hope that appeals to you aesthetically.
Well, I just want. Yeah. Well, I'm just curious.
Drink and pee.
Got it. So it's. Maybe you guys all know that.
And there's water. There's water on the moon. There's permanent ice caps on the southern craters on, like Shackleton crater on the moon has ice in it on the moon that's just there. Now to me it's a precious resource. You don't just want to go, hey, let's go mine that and use it all up. So there's none for the next generation. But it is there, and there's there's water on Mars as well.
Sweet, we're set.
There's water all over the place. Water is probably the most common compound in the universe. 3/4 of the universe by weight is hydrogen. Oxygen is the third most common element in the universe. So you have oxygen, you have hydrogen, you make water. It's all over the place.
How do we get to the speed of light?
That's a different question.
That's a lot harder. But I'm game.
I don't like the mass thing is bumming me out. How we increase. All right, I won't take this panel in another direction.
hard.
But if we're going to really explore, we got to figure that out.
That's where you encourage students to go into physics to help figure it, because the adults can't figure it out. So we need your help.
Okay, next question. Astronauts have to go through intensive training before going up to space and must be healthy. How would the space tourism industry deal with bad customers? And I think you're an example of a definitely not bad customer.
The more weight you lose, the higher you'll go. Yeah, we have a wide range of customers and of fitness levels and medical profiles, but our goal is really to make it accessible to as many people as possible. And so we're trying to make it to sort of the roller coaster level, where if you don't have a back problem and you're not pregnant, or heart problem and pregnant, you're okay. We'll let you fly. And oh yeah, and so we only have 3 days of training. So the requirement is that you come down to New Mexico and you do 3 days of training with us, and then you can go and go on your flight. So it's definitely trying to open it up. To, you don't have to be, John Glenn to fly anymore.
Kind of a question from the ethical side of things now. What are your thoughts on the ethics of colonizing other planets? Is there any difference from space travel and colonizing the New World in this context?
There is an ethics. I mean, we could say the New World had an obvious ethics problem, and we all know about that one. But what about Mars? It's probably not the case that there are, residents of Mars welcoming you at first and then later deciding you're a bad deal for them. But there may be, in this sense. We don't know if there's any life on Mars or ever was any life on Mars, but it's conceivable that there was or is, and it would be underground. And speaking of Bob Zubrin, there was a conference over that which this came up, and the question was indeed, what is the ethics of saying that you go to Mars and you know that under, 100 feet under the ground or a meter under the ground or something, that there's all this microbial life. Those are the Martians, right? Not
That reminds me of a great Star Trek Next Generation, when they had come upon a planet, and maybe you saw this, and Jean-Luc Picard gets a distress signal, and it says, "Sacks of water, why are you attacking us?"
Yes. Well, yeah, the microbes are unlikely to send you that message, but it may indeed be the case. And so the question is, all right, you go there and you set up a colony, and you may destroy that indigenous biota. It'd probably be hard to destroy it all, but eventually you might destroy it all. So the question is, are you justified in doing that? After all, you're humans, they're microbes, right? And this came up, and Bob Zubrin was holding forth about colonizing Mars, and somebody asked exactly that question. And Zubrin kind of scanned the room with his X-ray eyeballs, and there were, streaks of black cinder appearing on the walls as he was doing it. And then he said to the audience, when it comes to a choice between the lives of microbes and those of humans, I know where my sympathies lie. So you may not agree with that, but it is a potential problem that may be something that has to be confronted at some point.
Well, and it's important for us to start thinking about, how history, what side of history do you want to be on? So when people had slaves in this country, that was normal, and everyone was doing it, and it was okay. And now, we have a different view. And I hope that we'll be able to take those lessons and feed them forward, and have, a little more humility the next time we encounter, something different than ourselves, and learn from that, and not disregard microbes so cavalierly. Actually, yeah, it's the same thing. Same thing with mining asteroids. I'll just throw in this as well. We talk about mining asteroids, and I'm all for mining asteroids. I think it's a great, strip mining off Earth and take it off world. One of my goals is to make Earth a park. And we're doing things in space, so we don't have to do them on Earth anymore. And you have to be I really want us to learn to be really respectful with the asteroids. Not just say, oh, there's millions of them, we can just take them all, there's plenty, and that same kind of hubris that that's got us into trouble so many times on Earth. So I always like to try to take a lesson from like the Native Americans and say, okay, well, let's harvest this asteroid, and then let's pray, let's thank it for, giving its body to us to sustain us through the winter, and make sure we only cull so many asteroids so there's enough to, sustain 7 generations, and just always be thinking, about this long term and not just about how many trillion dollars it's worth. The street value of this platinum.
Maybe you could have parks for them. That it silenced the whole room.
Was that a Native American? Was that a
No. Just saying,
reservation
you
reference?
want to treat the asteroids with respect. I mean, yeah. I don't know, the rocks in my backyard I treat with respect. But I'm just saying that if you really want to do that, then you could, cordon off some space between
Yeah.
Mars and Jupiter and say, this is an
Yeah,
asteroid
this
park,
is-
and we're going to let them
gonna
have
leave
their own
some.
ecosystem here. But the thing is that asteroids, unlike people or animals or plants, they're not biological.
Well,
So
but there's an aesthetic. There's an aesthetic value too. So like the Grand Canyon does,
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to destroy it just because it's a rock. It's like, well, it has.
I
has
agree
its
with
own-
that. I mean, you want to keep some for future generations so they can
Yeah.
be mined. Or you want to. It's like collecting old cars. We're going to make a park for them.
We've gotten quite a few questions on the regulation of space tourism. So how do you think private space, especially as we go outside of low Earth orbit, should or would be regulated from a national or a global perspective?
Wow, yeah, I got my head full of regulations just for suborbit, so beyond low Earth orbit, I haven't thought as much about. Right now, the FAA regulates it, not like airliners. We have a distinct set of regulations. They don't regulate us like airliners because it would be too expensive for us to try to be as rigorous as United. So we have, bad example. Some other reputable airline. But we, I should have read more of the news this morning. So we're under an experimental license right now. So all of our customers sign an experimental waiver saying, yes, we understand this is a new unregulated industry. This is not just like a commercial airliner. We understand the risks we're taking. We want it to be a part of this. And so that's the regulatory regime we fall under right now. Once you go beyond low Earth orbit, then you're starting to deal with international things too, and like colonization and, it's interesting. I was hanging out with Apollo 9 astronaut Rusty Schweikert this weekend at Yuri's Night, LA, and he was talking about, he did a lot of work on how to protect the Earth from asteroids, the ones that wiped out the dinosaurs. Like, hey, this is a planetary problem, you guys. Like, what if something's coming? He said the hard part isn't the technology, and the hard part isn't the detection. It's like we're smart enough. If we really put our minds to it, if we want to, we can figure that stuff out. He said the hard part is making the decision. Because as a planet, we're not good at making decisions for our planet. Like coming together, COP21, let's all come together and make a decision as a planet for how to take care of our world. And he said the hardest part is us making a decision. And so I think that's really a powerful frontier where we're going to need a lot of help while working on how do we, as a species, make decisions for how to take care of ourselves and our planet. And that's what we're going to be doing beyond Earth.
Next question. Do you think the reusability of rockets is a step that needs to be proven extensively before space tourism takes off?
Yeah.
It got proven pretty powerfully last week with SpaceX reusing of their Falcon 9 rocket. They launched it last year, and then they launched it again, this first stage this year, which is mind-bogglingly huge advance for our industry. Mind-bogglingly. He likes to say it's like a 747 landing at New York, and then they throw it in the ocean, and then they have to start building a new one. He said, if you reuse that 747, it's a lot more efficient. So that's what they're starting to do now with the Falcon 9, which is revolutionary. Will they have to prove it? Yeah, but they're going to keep doing that, a few more times, hopefully this year and next year. But it's all. It's funny because it's sort of, I'm a biologist by training, so it's sort of, for me, it's like evolutionary paths. I love watching SpaceX has got their reusable rockets that take off and land, and then Blue Origin also has rockets that are going to take off and they're also reusable, take off and land vertically. Virgin Galactic has, we take off horizontally like an airplane, and we land horizontally like an airplane, which I like because I think it's a lot easier to integrate into the air traffic control. So when you start going from Tokyo to Sydney, it's a lot easier to get clearance for your airplane than for your rocket on the runway. So I think it's just neat. They just have different ecological niches of what they all offer. And then Worldview has a balloon. And so instead of people who don't want to do launch or that acceleration or craziness, they just want the gentle, rise above the atmosphere and looking down at Earth peacefully and gracefully. So you have all this diversity of niches that they can all fill of different space tourism companies.
In terms of timeline of space tourism, when do you think, say, we'll have had 100 people, say, customers?
Well, we've already got 8. Been to the International Space Station. So that's pretty cool. It's a good start. I think, God willing, Virgin Galactic will start flying customers next year. SpaceX will probably start flying NASA astronauts next year. How long will it take to get to 100? I'd say in 3 years' time, we'll probably get to 100. 5 years' time, we'll get to 500. I don't know. It's cool stuff.
Is terraforming a viable option? Do you think we could make planets habitable for ourselves?
So my old mentor at NASA Ames, Dr. Chris McKay, he's one of the world experts on terraforming. He's an extraordinary guy. And he likes to say, we've got lots of experience with making planets warmer. We're really good at that, actually. So on Mars, if you just make the atmosphere is about a thousandth of our pressure, right? 1% of our pressure. So 1% of our pressure. So you want to make it a little bit thicker of an atmosphere, and you want to make it add some oxygen to it. And if you do it, just make it a little bit warmer. So Chris has some fun proposals for, we used to have the CFCs from the aerosol cans that we've luckily banned because they were heating up our atmosphere. But he said, I found that there's apparently chlorobromocarbons are even better than CFCs at warming atmospheres. And so Chris is like, okay, we'll just make a factory on Mars of CBCs, and we'll start pumping out that, and we'll start warming up the atmosphere on Mars and making it thicker. And within 100 years, you'd be able to walk around on the surface of Mars without a pressure suit. You just need an oxygen mask. And it's just some really interesting things that become possible on Mars. So it's really good that we're learning how to warm things here.
Yeah.
It's good training.
Yeah, the proposals to do that, well, yes, you just send all your SUVs to Mars, but you can have trouble buying gas. What you can do is throw old refrigerators at Mars, that's been suggested, and get the CFCs out of there. They were destroying the ozone layer, as you know, but they are great greenhouse gases indeed. And so you could do that, or if that's not practical because it's very expensive, what you can do is redirect an asteroid that has some volatiles, and have that just slam into Mars and produce all these volatiles. And once you warm up Mars by it's on the order of 5 or 10 degrees on average, right? Then you begin to melt the polar caps, which just ice under the surface. You go to the North Pole of Mars and you just scratch in the dirt and you'll find ice, right? Same with the South Pole. In fact, over most of Mars that'll be the case. So it's just sitting there as ice. It's been sitting there for probably 4 billion years, and you just warm it up so it sublimates, right? And now it's in the atmosphere. And as you know, water vapor is an even better greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So now you warm it up more, which melts more of the ice, which warms it up more, so very quickly now you can get the temperatures up, and you have a thicker atmosphere too, but you don't have any oxygen. And to solve that problem, what you do is you plant a lot of plants. Right. But the time scale for all this is indeed, at least people who've looked at it, it's on the order of 100 or 200 years. You don't do it overnight.
Well, with our barbaric technology, these younger kids, I'm sure, will come up with something better.
Super plants.
Building off of that a little bit, Elon Musk has talked about nuking the poles of Mars to create that kind of effect. What are your thoughts?
Just gut reaction, no. I don't know, just doesn't sound like a great idea. I mean, there's better ways to do it. But anyway, the other point that I wanted to make sure to stress is when we were up in the Canadian Arctic, we flew into Resolute Bay, which is the northernmost commercial airport in the world. You can any one of you could just go online right now and go to, First Air and buy a flight up to Resolute Bay. You can go kayaking. And, we're up at about 80 degrees north, so you're pretty much next to the North Pole. And there's 24 hours of sunlight, there's water, there's food, there's, strawberries being, shipped in, for the supermarket, or more like it's not quite a supermarket. You have, cell service, back to the United States, you're in the same time zone, but people don't live there. Well, I mean, the Inuit live there, but Americans aren't flocking there, to buy second homes. So people, a lot of, people in my industry especially, like we think, oh, we want to go to Mars, we can terraform it and it'll be great. It's a good backup when we screw up our planet. But to me, I mean, going to Mars, I do think we should go to Mars, but for other reasons. I don't think we should go to Mars because we've run out of space on Earth or because we've messed up Earth. I think Earth is the most extraordinary and the most fabulous and the most impressive planet of all the thousands that we've discovered out in the universe so far, and certainly the closest. And I don't think anything we do to Mars or anything I build, and I'm going to build some cool cities on orbit. 10,000 person cities, they're going to be awesome, but still nothing is going to compare to our home planet. And so whatever we do out there, however great it's going to be, whatever, we always have to take care of home.
The Klingons, thank you, precious little, for your comments on their planet. Actually, yes, obviously Earth is much more habitable than any of the nearby planets. But terraforming Mars as a long-term project actually makes sense, not because of the population growth, because it doesn't do anything for that, right? It has the same land area as Earth. It just doesn't have the oceans. And besides, if you terraform it, maybe it does have oceans. So it has even less acreage than Earth. So what's a factor of 2, right? Okay, so air conditioning gives you more than a factor of 2, because now you can build condos in the Southwest. So it isn't for that. It's for the insurance policy that it gives you, that now if something really terrible happens here on Earth, at least you've got plan B, which is Mars, and humanity hasn't gone away. That's kind of the interesting thing about it.
Can you comment on the role of space elevators in space tourism?
Yeah, I talked about that yesterday. I don't know. Space elevators will reduce the cost of going into space by 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. As I mentioned, it costs about $10,000 per pound to go into space now in a rocket. Okay, so take your weight, multiply it by, in pounds, multiply by $10,000, and now you know the price of a ticket just, to get you up there, let alone, the amenities that you may demand en route, like Sudoku or whatever. All right, now, the thing is that if you have a space elevator, which of course is just a high-tech beanstalk at the equator, right? So you can just go up in an elevator listening to music on the way. It can reduce that from $10,000 a pound to $100 a pound, maybe even $10 a pound, and now it's the cost of a cruise, right? And it isn't just taking you up. Of course, anything that you're going to build in terms of infrastructure in orbit or on the moon or Mars, once you get up into orbit, you're most of the way in terms of energy to the rest of the universe. That's the way to go. But the problem is you got to build the beanstalk out of something with very high tensile strength. That's carbon nanotubes. The technology for that to allow you to do this is said to be 2035. That's when it's going to be around. I hear this from people who have crystal balls at home. I don't know that that's true or not, but once it happens, you may look back on rockets as, oh yeah, that's kind of quaint, just like going from Europe to America in sailing ships looks kind of quaint.
I look forward to that.
We've also had a lot of questions about the affordability of space tourism. You mentioned you spent $200,000 on a ticket. And Fred, you mentioned you were interested in buying a ticket in the future. Is that correct? So
For $5.
So you can interpret this question and the definition of affordability as you wish. About how many years do you estimate until space tourism becomes mass scale and relatively affordable?
You're probably the best at answering that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. Yeah, that's a lot of crystal balling. I would like to say it would be 20 or 30 years, but who knows? It's going to depend a lot on what we do and what we make happen.
What is affordable?
Yeah.
That's a huge question, right? Is a Tesla affordable? No, it really isn't. But there are lots of vehicles, I think, in the next several years that will be coming out that will be far more affordable. I don't know, you know a lot more than I do, but I have a feeling that in 25 years, 10% of the population will be considering it, could probably afford it if they choose to do so versus going to Aspen or wherever they go. Family of 4, $25,000, how's that?
Aspen residents take note.
This may have been something you touched on before, but could hydroponic technology be used in space even with the lack of gravity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm amazed at what is happening in the agricultural sector, both from a vertical, the types of innovations that we're seeing that are being printed and online. It's just incredible. And mark my words that in 10 to 15 years, you will see a lot of these aquaponics systems, particularly in urban locations. It's not the answer, but it is a very, very important variable in the equation as part of the good food movement, along with waste. But yes, the answer is reducing waste. But yes, it will absolutely be possible.
A question from the more political side of things. How do you think our politicians and leaders would benefit from seeing Earth from space?
At least they'd be off the planet.
Oh yeah, it's always been the dream of ours to be able to do summits in space. You know, if you have two people that aren't getting along, like I would love to have an on-orbit facility where I could, take up the world leaders and say, okay, what's our plan? What are you guys going to do? Those are your countries down there.
I mean, maybe there's something to be said for this because, Hitler, for example, never saw the New World. He was, he didn't travel very far. He had a very constricted worldview, and I kind of wonder, had he ever made a trip to New York or something like that, whether he would have been so cavalier about starting a war which eventually involved America. I kind of wonder whether that history might have been different.
Well, there's no doubt, and I'm sure you've read articles that space travel or going to space it allows us a tremendous opportunity to bring people from other countries. There was another panel earlier, and you had mentioned it as well. We're terrible as a planet in making unified decisions, just awful. And so hopefully that if we did get a number of world leaders together, it would be a panacea. No, it wouldn't be a panacea, but it would be a step in the right direction. I like the idea of sending Donald Trump into space, by the way.
We have time for a few more questions here. Please comment on private versus government sponsorship of space programs.
Well, that's great. So I've worked on both sides. I was a NASA contractor, many different centers for years, and got to see. I started out my career at Johnson Space Center in the astronaut office, which is pretty cool. They're very different. One of the things that I like is that, in the 60s when they were starting out, all the people in mission control, all those were all young guys, in their 20s, and they were, doing things that had never been done before. They just didn't have a rule book to go to. And it was very innovative and very pioneering. And it's fun to see sort of that Wild West coming back to the space industry just on the private side. And so you again have all these young engineers and sitting in mission control and setting off, creating these systems and, doing things that have never been done before, and having that same excitement back, but it's on the private side. And I think it's useful right now because it allows for more freedom of, like they have a little, if you when I worked inside the bureaucracy of NASA, one of the things that's good about a bureaucracy is it's very steady. One of the things that's hard about a bureaucracy is it's very stifling. So getting space flight out of that environment has been really helpful for us.
Any other thoughts from our other two panelists?
I'm a big believer in entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship. I would prefer not to have lots of. I think the free market could really benefit this area. I'm for businesses that both make money and do good. And there seems to be bureaucracy, to me, can really hurt innovation. Generally, it hasn't always, but NASA I think is an example of where it didn't. But I get nervous about that.
Okay, we have time for one last question here, and maybe each of our three panelists can comment on this. Do you consider yourself optimistic concerning the future of the human race, especially in the context of space tourism and in the future colonization?
100%. Wouldn't be here if I didn't. That's my job. I'm the resident optimist.
No, I'm optimistic too. My concern, expressed many times, is that we're inventing our successors. And so, really, you ought to ask the robots, what do you think about space tourism?
There's a panel on sex with artificial intelligence, I believe.
Sex with robots?
Yes, there is a panel on that.
It's this afternoon at 1 o'clock.
So
I encourage you all to come.
I think it's during my other panel, and I'm so
bring
upset.
your robot.
I love my robot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm for sex with robots and for space travel. No. All right, thanks.
Thank you all for submitting your questions. I'd also like to thank our two producers, Bryce and Cynthia, and let's one more time thank our fantastic panelists.